Harvard professors now teach his math app, but when he built it, he didn't even have Wi-Fi. Just a cracked laptop, a $10 phone plan, and a mother too sick to eat. This is the story of Evan Carter, the boy who rebuilt the way we teach math from a broken garage no one believed in. The rain that night came down in waves, beating against the sagging metal roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside the small, forgotten garage behind 16 Jefferson Street, a lone figure hunched over a battered Toshiba laptop, propped up on an old milk crate. The space smelled of damp concrete and old motor oil. In one corner sat a disassembled treadmill no one had used in years. Along the back wall, water pooled beneath a crooked stack of cardboard boxes. And in the center of it all, a threadbare camping mat, a cracked laptop nicknamed Wheezy, and Evan Carter. At 17, Evan had already abandoned the familiar rhythms of high school. Not because he had failed, but because life had asked him to choose. School or survival. His mother, Caroline, used to be a waitress with a quick laugh and a sharper mind than most professors. But an autoimmune disease had reduced her to thin bones and trembling fingers, barely able to hold a coffee cup. Most nights, she worked the graveyard shift at Eddie's Diner to keep them afloat, often coming home with nothing but tea in her stomach. Evan had watched her shrink under exhaustion, watched the unopened bills pile up on their counter, watched the landlord's warnings turn to threats. When he dropped out at 16, it wasn't a choice. It was an act of necessity. He picked up extra shifts, fixing cracked iPhones and glitchy Androids at the back of a gas station, scrimping together $85 to buy Wheezy from a pawn shop, a laptop so old it wheezed every time it booted up. But to Evan, that machine wasn't old. It was freedom. Because when the world closed its doors, when teachers stopped believing in the quiet boy in the back row, Wheezy became his gateway. His education didn't come from a classroom. It came from curiosity. And Evan Carter had curiosity in spades. That rainy night between 2 phone repair jobs, Evan had stumbled on a Reddit post that wouldn't leave his mind. "My students hate algebra," the teacher had written. "I wish there was a way to make it less abstract." Hundreds of replies, but no real solutions. Evan had stared at the cracked ceiling of the garage long after midnight, a thought spinning in his mind like an unfinished equation. What if algebra could move? Not just numbers on a static page, but something alive, touchable, beautiful. Because to Evan, math wasn't cold. It wasn't a weapon of intimidation. It was a dance. When he looked at a graph, he saw rhythm, motion, the sway of a parabola, the pulse of an equation transforming. The tragedy? No one taught it that way. At school, when Evan had once corrected a math teacher mid-lecture, the man had laughed and said, "Don't get cocky, Carter." But Evan hadn't been cocky. He had simply been right. And no one cared. The memory burned. Now, as the rain poured harder and the clock blinked 2:03 a.m., Evan opened a blank file on Wheezy. The screen flickered, the keys stuck, but he typed, "What if algebra could be animated?" And with that question, one whispered in a garage no one visited, a revolution began. For the next 72 hours, Evan barely slept. He coded furiously, fingers flying across the keyboard, eyes bloodshot, heart racing. Stick figure graphs, moving variables, functions that danced instead of sat static. It was messy. It crashed often. But it worked. By sunrise on the 3rd day, Wheezy's screen flickered with a crude prototype. A simple algebra playground where X wasn't a symbol anymore. It was a traveler on a journey. At first, Evan built it only for himself, a personal tool, a place where he could see math the way it lived in his mind. But the garage couldn't contain a spark that bright. The first person to see it was Jordan Kim, Evan's childhood friend and occasional confidant. Jordan had swung by after a long shift at the grocery store, only to find Evan hunched over Wheezy, eyes wild with focus. "What's that?" Jordan asked, pointing at the glowing shapes morphing on screen. "Just something I made," Evan replied softly. "It shows how algebra works, not just what it is." Jordan leaned closer. A few moments passed, then he whispered words that would echo in Evan's mind for weeks. "Wait, I actually get this." That single sentence was a spark. For the first time, someone outside Evan's mind had seen the magic, and that changed everything. Over the next 3 months, Evan worked relentlessly. He added levels, designed puzzles, built an experience where math wasn't a chore. It was a game of discovery. No ads, no sign-ups, just click and learn. Then, one rain-soaked evening, he uploaded the app anonymously to an education forum. Username, Garage Coder. He didn't expect much. In fact, he went to sleep, assuming it would be ignored, like so many of his ideas had been. But when Evan awoke the next morning, something was different. Wheezy's ancient email client was exploding. Dozens of messages, teachers, parents, coaches, students. "My daughter couldn't pass algebra until your app. I used this in class, every kid engaged, every single one." And then, one message stopped Evan cold. "Dear Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Henry Dalton, Department of Mathematics at Harvard University. A colleague shared your app during our Teaching Innovation seminar. I was floored. We'd love to talk." Evan stared at the screen. Harvard, the same place whose lectures he used to pirate from the library computer. Watching from behind a wall he thought he'd never scale. Now they wanted him. His hands trembled, his heart pounded, and in the silence of that rain-slick garage, Evan whispered 5 words that would shape the rest of his life. "What if I'm not just a dropout?" For 3 days, Evan Carter didn't respond to the Harvard email. Not because he wasn't excited, not because he wasn't proud, but because he didn't know how. What do you say to someone whose signature carried 2 PhDs, 3 fellowships, and a Harvard crest? Evan stared at the blinking cursor in his Gmail draft. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. "Dear Dr. Dalton, thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to talk. I'm usually free after 6 p.m. He read it over once, twice. It felt small. Too plain. Like sending a paper airplane to a jetliner. But it was all he had. With a deep breath, he hit send. 15 minutes later, far faster than Evan expected, a reply appeared. 6:30 p.m. tonight work? Here's a Zoom link." Evan's pulse raced. Tonight. He sprinted to the garage, flipped open Wheezy. The screen flickered, groaned. "Please, just one more night," Evan whispered. He taped a small piece of cardboard over the cracked webcam lens so the LED wouldn't blind him. Adjusted the angle, waited. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the Zoom window blinked to life. Dr. Henry Dalton appeared. Calm eyes, a musical voice, a soft gray sweater. Behind him, a towering bookshelf full of titles that likely weighed more than Evan's dreams. "Mr. Carter," Dalton smiled. "The man behind the math?" Evan chuckled nervously. "More like the boy behind the bugs." Dalton laughed. "Are you kidding? Your app did something we've tried to do for years. Make math speak human." For nearly an hour, they spoke about math, about pedagogy, about how most students learned formulas, but not intuition. Dalton leaned forward, voice lowering. "I showed algebra to 3 of my colleagues. One of them cried." "Cried?" Evan echoed, stunned. "She's taught algebra for 30 years, Dalton explained. She said she'd never seen a tool help students feel math this clearly. A pause. So here's what we're thinking, Dalton continued. Harvard is piloting a new experimental math instruction program. We'd like to feature your app as part of it. Evan's breath caught. You mean in actual Harvard classes? Yes. And we'd like to invite you to speak on a panel, virtually, of course. Just share your process, your thinking. Evan froze. He wasn't afraid of math. But people? Public speaking had always been his personal monster. Dalton must have seen it in his eyes. No pressure, he said gently. But your voice matters, and people need to know brilliance doesn't always wear a blazer. Evan swallowed. Okay, he whispered. I'll do it. That night, Evan barely slept. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was watching Harvard through a glass wall. He felt like someone had cracked open the door, even just a little. The panel was set for the following Thursday. 6 days. Evan prepared obsessively. He watched TED Talks, practiced in front of the garage mirror, wrote and rewrote his notes a dozen times. When Thursday arrived, he ironed his best shirt, an old button-down from his uncle's wedding, made sure Wheezy didn't overheat. At exactly 2 p.m., the Zoom panel began. Faces filled the screen. Professors, researchers, a few undergrads. Evan's stomach twisted. Dr. Dalton introduced him. Today we have Evan Carter, creator of the Algebra app. He's not an alum, not a professor, but he's done something extraordinary. Then it was Evan's turn. Hi, he began softly. I'm Evan. I dropped out of high school at 16, not because I hated learning, but because life got complicated. But I never stopped studying. Just quietly. He shared how he built the app in a leaky garage, why he believed math should move, how animation helped kids see algebra, not just memorize it. He didn't have fancy slides, just passion. When he finished, the Zoom room was silent for 3 long seconds. Then, the applause began. Digital, but real. Comments flooded in. This is the future of education. Incredible clarity. Can we get him to speak at our curriculum summit? Evan blinked. Were they really talking about him? Dr. Dalton returned to the screen. We'd like to go further. Would you be open to sharing your source code with our innovation lab? Evan hesitated. His code wasn't elegant. His methods were self-taught. His math not always formal. He'd built algebra like someone building a treehouse with duct tape and hope. Sure, he said. But it's kind of messy. Dalton smiled. Good. That means it's human. The following weeks blurred. Harvard's EdTech lab reviewed the app, sent detailed feedback, asked if Evan wanted to collaborate on expanding it. They offered an honorarium, enough for Evan to upgrade from Wheezy to a real machine. When he unboxed the used MacBook he bought, he cried quietly, transferring the files. Messages continued pouring in. Students, parents, teachers. Your app helped my son pass algebra. For the first time, my students are asking to do more math. But with success came new questions. One night, Dr. Dalton called. Evan, are you planning to go back to school? Evan paused. Honestly, I don't know how. I don't have a diploma. I never took the SAT. Dalton replied, There's something called the Harvard Extension School. You'd qualify, especially now. Evan Googled it. Placement exams, night classes, and the price. I can't afford that, he admitted. You won't have to, Dalton replied. We're arranging a scholarship. You've already proven you belong. After the call, Evan sat on the garage floor staring at his hands. A scholarship from Harvard. A door opened. Not just a crack, but wide enough to walk through. 2 weeks later, Evan took the placement test. 3 hours, 4 proofs, 10 problems. When he turned it in, he was shaking. 5 days later, an envelope arrived. Evan didn't open it immediately, just held it. Finally, with trembling fingers, he tore it open. One line: "Welcome to the Harvard Extension School." His mother read the letter twice, then burst into tears. "See," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "You never stopped learning. And now, the world finally sees it too." The first day Evan walked into Harvard as a student, no one held the door for him. He didn't expect them to, but he noticed. The campus was breathtaking. Red brick, old ivy, soft echoes of centuries-old ambition whispered through the courtyards. But Evan didn't wear legacy or confidence. He wore a canvas backpack with a broken zipper, sneakers with uneven soles, and the same hoodie he'd coded in through dozens of sleepless nights. Inside the Extension School's math building, he found room 108. A chalkboard already filled with formulas loomed at the front like a gatekeeper. Students filled the room, laptops gleaming, espresso cups in hand. They looked polished, prepared. Evan slipped into a seat in the back, as always. Then Dr. Sophia Bennett entered, crisp, no nonsense, holding a stack of syllabi and a gaze that sliced through excuses. "This is applied structures in algebraic systems," she began. "If you're here for hand-holding, wrong room. If you're here to make mistakes publicly and recover quickly, welcome." Evan exhaled. Brutal honesty, his native language. But as the first week passed, Evan learned something harsh. Knowing math wasn't the same as being believed in math. His first assignment? He used one of his animation-based approaches to prove a concept. When he turned it in, the TA emailed him 2 days later. "We don't accept visual methods. Please rewrite your solution using formal notation." Evan had used that very visual to explain the concept to thousands. It had landed. But here, it didn't count. The pressure mounted. Week 2 brought group projects. Students picked teams fast. Evan hesitated, just a second too long. By the time he looked up, only one seat remained beside 2 students. Isaac, tall, lanky. Lena, arms folded, eyes sharp. "You're the app guy, right?" Lena asked flatly. Evan blinked. "I guess." Isaac added, "Cool. Just don't turn this into one of your YouTube animations. This is math, not marketing." Evan swallowed hard. Right. For 2 nights, Evan worked tirelessly, built the group's proof carefully, elegantly. He even coded a visualization, not for credit, just to help them see. When they presented, Dr. Bennett nodded. "Efficient," she said, "and unorthodox, in a refreshing way." After class, Isaac pulled Evan aside. "I don't like the way you work, man. It's too flashy. This isn't TikTok." Evan didn't answer, not because he had nothing to say, but because he'd learned long ago. When the room doubts you, speaking louder doesn't help. Showing up does. By the start of week 4, Evan Carter was exhausted. He had barely kept up with coursework at Harvard Extension School. His mother had picked up a 3rd shift at the diner. The bills still came faster than the tips. The small grant from Harvard's Innovation Lab barely covered books. At night, Evan still fixed phones at the gas station just to buy groceries. One chilly Wednesday morning, while waiting for class to start, Evan drifted into sleep at his desk. His face pressed against a graphing calculator. He dreamed of algebraic waves crashing on a beach. When he woke, there was a soft laugh behind him. "Careful," a voice teased. "You're becoming an icon." the sleeping dropout who solved algebra. It was Lena. She wasn't mocking him. Not entirely. "I saw your app," she said, sliding into the seat beside him. "Last year. Helped my little brother pass pre-algebra." Evan blinked. "Thanks, I guess." Lena folded her arms. "I judged you too fast," she muttered. "I've had to work too hard to be here. I thought you were just some poster child for token diversity." Evan looked her in the eye. "I'm not," he said softly. "I'm just trying not to fail." She didn't smile, but she didn't leave either. That night, Evan returned to the garage. Wheezy was gone, replaced now by his second-hand MacBook, but the spirit remained. He pulled out his old notebook, the one where he had first scribbled the words, "What if algebra could move?" Now he flipped to a fresh page, drew a graph titled Emotion versus Understanding, a smiley face at the top right quadrant, and a thought echoing in his mind. You don't teach someone to swim by showing them equations. You throw them in, but you stay in the water too. His mother had said that once. Maybe that's what he wanted to build, not just an app, a philosophy, one that threw students into complexity with joy, not fear. He opened a new document and typed, "The Wall. Why we stopped loving math after age 10. The idea hit hard. Children are born curious. They play with numbers, patterns, shapes. But somewhere around middle school, fear creeps in. Standardized tests, red X's, speed drills, the wall. And on that wall, written in bold, cruel letters, you're not a math person." What if he could tear that wall down? What if algebra wasn't just an app, but a movement? The next day, Evan walked nervously into Dr. Sophia Bennett's office. She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Carter?" I want to submit a supplemental project," he said. "Something outside class. A concept paper." Her brow arched. "You're barely staying afloat in coursework." "I know," Evan said, "but I think this matters." She sighed, gestured to the chair. "Explain." For 15 minutes, Evan outlined the wall theory, the gamification of fear, the emotional block math education never talks about. Dr. Bennett didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she said softly, "That's not a paper. That's a thesis." A pause. "You want to turn this into research?" Evan nodded. "Eventually. But first, I want to test it. With real students. Real classrooms." She tapped her pen against the desk. "That's not how things usually work here." "I know," Evan said, "but maybe it should." Dr. Bennett stared at him a long moment. Finally, "I'll approve it, but I want a weekly report. If your coursework drops, I pull the plug." Deal. That Friday, Evan visited a public middle school in Roxbury. A teacher had emailed him weeks earlier. "We've got 1 smartboard, 6 broken chairs, and kids who think algebra is punishment. If you want to try your app here, be my guest." The classroom buzzed with restless energy. Evan pulled out algebra on a projector. The kids stared, wide-eyed. He showed them how X could run, jump, morph, how equations danced when balanced. They laughed. They shouted answers. One girl whispered, "Wait, this is actually kind of fun." The teacher wiped her eyes. Outside, as Evan packed up, the principal shook his hand. "Whatever Harvard's feeding you, keep it coming." Evan smiled. No tux, no titles, just a hoodie and a math app. But he felt taller than ever. 3 weeks later, an email arrived. Subject: Invitation to Present. Harvard Innovation in Education Forum. Evan read it 5 times before daring to believe. The forum was a closed-door event. No live stream, no press, just deans, professors, education researchers, and a handful of select student innovators. He had submitted his wall theory and demoed algebra to a few faculty members. He thought they'd nod politely, file it under interesting, but not scholarly. Instead, they invited him to speak. He had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to explain why most students give up on math by age 12. 10 minutes to prove that a high school dropout with no formal degree might just contribute to the future of education. He didn't sleep the night before. Instead, he practiced his talk in the mirror of the dorm's shared bathroom, while someone 2 stalls over blasted loud rap and another guy vomited tequila into the sink. Harvard was fancy, but it was still college. The morning of the event, Evan wore his only button-down shirt, the one from his first job interview at the gas station. The sleeves were too short, the collar held up with discreet tape. Backstage at Pierce Auditorium, Evan stood gripping a borrowed clicker and a flash drive. His heart pounded like a drum line. "Mr. Carter," a voice said behind him. He turned. A short, sharp-eyed woman in a tailored gray suit extended a hand. "Dr. Elise Monroe, I chair the forum. Just wanted to say, your idea caught attention, a lot of it." Evan swallowed. "Thanks, I just hope it holds up." Her eyes narrowed, smiling faintly. "Innovation doesn't have to look perfect. It just has to break something open." Then she vanished into the rows of academia, like a ghost in a blazer. The announcer stepped up. "Next, we welcome Evan Carter, current Extension School student and creator of the Algebra app, to speak on math accessibility and emotional barriers in education." Applause. Brief, polite. Evan walked to the center of the stage. Lights blinded him. He exhaled and began. "Hi, I'm Evan. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 because my mom was sick and we couldn't afford rent. I fixed phones during the day, but at night, I studied math on a $10 phone plan." A pause, one chuckle, then silence. "I built a math app in my garage. No funding, no mentors, just one broken laptop, and a belief that we're teaching math wrong." He clicked. Slide 1. A cartoon graph crying beside a test marked F. Most kids think they're bad at math. They're not. They're just afraid of looking stupid. Slide 2. The wall. It happens around 6th grade. You go from counting stars and shapes to variables and abstractions. Nobody explains the why, just the how. He walked slowly across the stage. By age 12, students stop seeing math as play. It becomes pain. Slide 3. A looping animation from algebra, a function transforming in real time. When I showed this animation to a kid in Roxbury last week, he said, "Oh, that's why the number flips when it crosses 0. He didn't ask for rules. He felt the logic." He paused. In math, we say show your work. But what if our work is emotional? What if the fear is the real equation we're not solving? Silence. Then, applause. Not polite. Real. After the presentation, the room transformed. Where before there had been polite interest, now there was a pulse. Professors leaned forward. Department heads whispered. A storm of questions descended on Evan. Would you be willing to open source the app? Can you collaborate with our instructional design team? Would you consider co-authoring a paper on this with us? Evan answered as best he could. But amid the whirlwind of scholarly curiosity, one person stood quietly in the corner. Dr. Elise Monroe. She didn't speak at first, just observed, arms crossed, eyes sharp. When the crowd thinned, she approached Evan. "You're not just proposing an app," she said softly. "You're proposing a shift." Evan nodded. "I think so." She tilted her head. "Would you consider applying for the Harvard Future of Learning Incubator?" Evan blinked. "Is that a program?" "It's not public," Monroe replied, "but it's where we nurture long shots, things that could change the system, not just polish it." She handed him a card. "Your application deadline is Friday. Don't miss it." And with that, she was gone. That night, Evan sat at his dorm desk, staring at the card. The Future of Learning Incubator. His heart raced. Could he really do this? He texted his mother. "Mom, they want me to join something called the Future of Learning Incubator." A few minutes later, her reply buzzed in. "Is it scary?" "Yeah," Evan replied. Her next message came quick. "Then it's probably worth doing." He closed the laptop and began writing his application. But by Thursday night, with the deadline approaching, Evan still hadn't filled out the last section. "What is your long-term vision?" He stared at the blinking cursor for nearly an hour. Finally, he typed, "To make the math classroom feel like a place of wonder again. To replace shame with play. And to make sure no kid ever hears, 'You're not a math person,' because we all are." He hit submit. 1 week later, an email arrived. Subject: "Welcome to the Incubator." "Dear Mr. Carter, congratulations. You have been selected to join the inaugural cohort of the Harvard Future of Learning Incubator. We believe your work is not only innovative, it is necessary." Evan read it 5 times, then whispered, "Okay." The incubator wasn't in some sleek Silicon Valley tower. It was housed in a repurposed brick building on the edge of campus. Faded red walls, squeaky floors, windows that rattled in the wind. Evan loved it immediately. His desk sat between 2 PhDs and across from a woman who had built a virtual chemistry lab for rural schools. Everyone in the room had titles, degrees, years of experience. Evan had none of those. But he had something different. Users. Algebra was now being used in over 200 classrooms across the U.S. A viral Reddit post had led to teachers in Detroit, Austin, and parts of Canada testing it on real students. Feedback poured in daily. Bugs, praise, suggestions. Even one typo that had accidentally turned a parabola into a banana for 2 weeks. A bug Evan laughed about while fixing it at 2 a.m. from the library basement. In the incubator, Evan's mentor was Dr. Laura Grant, a former data scientist turned education innovator. She wore round glasses, spoke in direct lines, and only smiled when something truly impressed her. During their first meeting, she reviewed Evan's code for 5 minutes, then looked up and said, "It's messy." Evan's stomach dropped. "I know." She tapped her pen against the desk. "But it's brilliant. You built intuition into logic. That's rare." Evan almost teared up. Almost. For the next 2 months, Evan lived 2 lives. By day, he sat through strategy meetings, learning how to structure grants, collaborate with UX designers, and expand app accessibility. By night, he still answered tech support emails himself, and on weekends, he visited classrooms. He never told students who he was, just sat in the back and watched as they played through algebra levels, solving visual puzzles about slope, inequality, and transformations using color, shape, and motion. And Evan noticed something powerful. When students messed up, they didn't sigh. They didn't say, "I suck at math." They just tried again, because the app didn't punish them. It invited them. But Evan knew none of it mattered unless the most skeptical teachers believed in it. So one afternoon, he composed an email. To Mr. Peter Harlan, Evan's old freshman algebra teacher. The one who had once said, If you think you're smarter than me, go ahead and teach the class. It hadn't been a joke. They hadn't spoken since. But Evan remembered something else about Mr. Harlan. He wasn't cruel, just tired. He taught 5 periods a day, coached soccer, graded papers on the subway. To Evan's surprise, the reply came 2 hours later. I'll give you 1 period. Come in next Friday. But don't expect miracles. Evan walked into his old high school with a knot in his stomach. The building still smelled of overcooked cafeteria pasta and waxed tile. Room 214, Algebra. 1. Mr. Harlan looked older now, hair grayer, but his eyes were the same, sharp, tired. You brought the app? He asked. Yes, on the tablets. Harlan handed them out without fanfare. A math game. For real? One student groaned. It's not a game, Harlan said flatly. It's a tool. Humor the creator. He's local. At first, the students tapped mindlessly. One closed the app, another tried to find TikTok. Then something shifted. A boy in a hoodie muttered, Wait, you can see when the slope goes negative. That's cool. A girl nearby said, Yo, if I just flip the shape, it solves it. Is that allowed? Harlan leaned over her shoulder. That's not just allowed. That's the point. And then, the room changed. Heads tilted, fingers moved with intent. Whispers became questions. Questions turned into grins. By minute 35, the room was alive. And Evan noticed something else. Mr. Harlan had stopped pacing. He was standing still, watching. After class, Harlan pulled Evan aside. You built this? Yeah. Harlan stared at him. Back then, he said slowly, you were always staring out the window. I thought you were zoning out. I was, Evan admitted, but I was solving things in my head. Harlan nodded. You were always ahead. I just didn't know how to reach you. They stood in silence a long moment. Then Harlan added quietly, You reached them today. That night, Evan walked home through the cold, thinking about what Harlan had said. You reached them. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but maybe he was becoming one. And if he could do that, without a degree, from a garage with a laptop named Wheezy, what could others do? If someone just gave them the tools. 2 weeks after visiting Mr. Harlan's class, Evan Carter sat in a crowded conference room in the Harvard Incubator building. It was quarterly review day. Each fellow had to present their project's impact, feedback, and long-term vision. Evan stood before a room of professors, funders, and Innovation Council members. Hands trembling, he clicked to the first slide. I'm not building a better test prep tool, he began softly. I'm building an empathy engine. A few brows lifted. Pens paused mid-air. Math doesn't just need to be solved, Evan continued. It needs to be felt. He showed classroom footage, including a clip of the boy in the hoodie grinning as he rotated a parabola on the tablet. This feels like cheating, but I'm learning. Laughter in the room. Then, a thoughtful silence. When the meeting ended, Dr. Laura Grant pulled Evan aside. You just got approved for Phase 2. Evan blinked. What does that mean? Funding. A research assistant. A meeting with the Harvard Curriculum Council. They want to discuss pilot integration. Pilot integration. Harvard teaching his app. The same Harvard where, 2 years ago, he hadn't even had Wi-Fi. Evan excused himself, walked to the bathroom, locked the stall. A single tear escaped. Then he wiped it away, because the work was just beginning. Room 301, Maxwell Building. A long oak table, tall arched windows, brass plaques on every chair. The curriculum council looked exactly as intimidating as Evan had imagined. Deans, department heads, and seated quietly, Dr. Elise Monroe. "Mr. Carter," said Dean Margaret Sloan, council chair, peering over thin spectacles, "you've requested consideration for algebra to be tested as a supplemental tool in our foundational courses. Is that correct?" Evan nodded. "You are not a graduate, not yet a degree holder. Some might question whether you are qualified to influence academic pedagogy." Evan met her gaze. Steady. "I understand that. But I'm not asking to teach the class. I'm asking to make the class more teachable." A quiet ripple moved through the room. He tapped a key. Slide 1. 2 side-by-side screenshots, a traditional algebra worksheet, and an animated equation unfolding like origami. "This is the same concept," Evan said, "but one causes panic, the other invites play." Slide 2. A heat map of user interaction across 47 classrooms. Average engagement duration, 28 minutes. Concept retention improved by 31%. "That's not theory," Evan said. "That's what's already happening, especially among ESL learners, students with ADHD, kids who've been told they're not math people." Dr. Monroe leaned forward. "Why do you think it works?" Evan replied softly, "Because it doesn't punish mistakes. It gives them shape. Mistakes become part of the motion, not a red mark on a test." Silence. Then, a hand raised. Dr. Andrew Patel, a notoriously sharp theoretical math professor. "I tried your app last weekend," he said. "I expected nonsense. I found insight. It reminded me of how I understood math, before I was taught how I was supposed to understand it." That changed the room. Suddenly, this wasn't just a pitch. It was a possibility. That evening, Evan received a text from Dr. Grant. "They're drafting the pilot proposal. You should celebrate." But Evan didn't go out. He went to his favorite spot on campus, the old stone steps behind Widener Library, opened his notebook. On the inside cover, he had once written, "Make the thing you wish existed when you were 12. That night, he underlined it twice. The following week, another message arrived. "Would you be willing to guest teach a class in Foundations of Education next Thursday?" It was from Dr. Anna Feldman, a professor who had once politely suggested Evan audit more, speak less. Now she was asking him to lead a seminar. Evan reread the email in disbelief, then typed, "Yes, absolutely." The classroom was packed, not just students, visiting educators, assistant principals, a few Harvard alumni who had heard whispers about the dropout who built the math app. Evan stepped to the whiteboard. No slides, no clicker. Just a marker and a question. He wrote, "What if we taught math like storytelling?" Then he turned to the room. "When I was 14, Evan began, my teacher handed me a worksheet with 20 problems. I got 19 right. 1 wrong." He circled the wrong one in red. He said, "You were so close. But that's not how stories work. If a character makes 19 brave choices and 1 mistake, you don't erase them. You need that mistake. That's the plot twist." He scanned the room. Math is the same. We don't learn by getting everything right. We learn by changing how we approach what's wrong. Hands began to rise. But how do you measure that? What about standards? Evan raised a hand gently. Don't get me wrong, rigor matters, but so does emotional safety. If a student's first math memory is fear, you've already lost the lesson. By the end of the hour, there were more questions than answers. Exactly what Evan wanted. Because now, they were thinking. That night, Evan received an email with a subject line that made his breath catch. Harvard Newsletter. Pilot integration of algebra approved for fall term. He clicked. There it was, in black and white. As part of a new pedagogical initiative, Harvard's Department of Mathematics will pilot Evan Carter's algebra app in 2 introductory algebra courses this fall. The tool aims to support visual and experiential learning for diverse student populations. Evan sat still for a long time. Then, without telling anyone, he walked to the basement computer lab where he had once snuck in to pirate Khan Academy videos, sat at an empty terminal, and cried. Not because he had made it, but because he realized he never needed to prove he could belong here. He had changed what here meant. Days later, during an incubator meeting, Dr. Grant pulled him aside. They want you to speak at the Dean's Colloquium in October. Evan blinked. That's for graduating fellows. I know, she said. They're making an exception. That night, Evan FaceTimed his mother. She was still in her diner apron, eyes tired. I got approved, he said simply. Harvard's teaching my app. She stared, then whispered, You built a door no one can close on you again. Evan smiled, but her next words made his chest tighten. And how many kids will walk through it now, Evan? He didn't know, but he was going to find out, because this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the equation, beginning to unfold. The first time Evan saw his app used in a real Harvard lecture hall, he didn't sit in the front row. He took a seat in the very back, hoodie up, notebook out, heart pounding. At the front of the room stood Dr. Lauren Kim, a sharp, no-nonsense educator known for her precision and fairness. She wasn't there to flatter Evan. She was there to test his work, under pressure. Today, she announced, we'll approach transformations not just through formulas, but through visualization. She clicked the screen. Algebra loaded. Murmurs rippled through the room. Is this the app everyone's talking about? Wait. Are we seriously using this? Evan braced himself. But then, a shift. Someone leaned forward and whispered, This makes so much more sense. A girl in the third row tapped her desk. Oh my God, the parabola's flipping. That's what reflection means. And suddenly, the room wasn't skeptical. It was awake. After class, Dr. Kim approached Evan where he sat quietly, still trying to blend in. She didn't say much, just handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it after she left. Keep building. The math hadn't changed, but the way they saw it just had. That night, Evan stayed late in the incubator lab. He stared at the screen for a long time, then wrote in his journal, the same old notebook from the garage. I used to think this was about proving I wasn't a failure. But maybe it's about proving that failure shouldn't disqualify people from learning. The next morning, an email changed everything again. Subject, visitor request, Roosevelt High, a school in the Bronx. A teacher named Mrs. Dwight had written, One of my students stumbled upon algebra during free period. Since then, he's been asking questions in class. First time in 2 years. If you're ever in NYC, would you come speak to our kids? They think you're a myth. Evan smiled, then booked the next bus to New York. Roosevelt High wasn't fancy. Crumbling stairs, flickering hallway lights, metal detectors at the entrance. But the classroom buzzed with energy. Mrs. Dwight introduced Evan simply. This is Evan Carter. He built that math app you all keep crashing the Wi-Fi with. The room erupted, phones out, questions flying. Wait, you're real? Did Harvard really say yes? Were you like a genius kid or something? Evan laughed. No, I was the quiet kid in the back. The one everyone thought wasn't trying. But I was trying, just not the way they taught it. He opened his laptop. Who wants to see how I used to think about math? He launched an early prototype, buggy, glitchy, full of hand-drawn animations, but the room leaned in. One kid whispered, "That's how I think too." And that's when Evan realized something. They didn't just want to learn math, they wanted permission to learn it their way. After the session, a boy named Diego Morales hung back, small, maybe 15, a chipped tooth, eyes that never stayed still. "You think someone like me could build something like that?" he asked. Evan studied him. "What do you mean? Someone like you?" Diego shrugged. "I'm not good at reading instructions. I mess up a lot. But when I see things move, I get it. I just don't think school's made for me." Evan pulled a pen from his backpack, wrote something on the back of his notebook. "Mess up often, learn anyway." He handed it to Diego. "It's not about being made for school," Evan said. "It's about realizing school doesn't get to define what you're made of." Back in Cambridge, Evan met with Dr. Grant over tea. "You look exhausted," she said, eyeing the circles under his eyes. "In a good way. But yeah." She closed her laptop. "You're not just running an app anymore. You're leading a movement." Evan blinked. "A movement?" "Your story is resonating beyond the app," Dr. Grant continued. "You're proof that access matters more than background, that tools matter more than titles." Evan let that settle. "You're going to need help," she added. Then, stunned him. "I want to help you build a team, full-time. You've earned a foundation grant from our partners. With that, you can hire developers, expand, translate the app into other languages, build a space, not just for you, but for all the Diegos out there." That night, Evan stared at a whiteboard filled with sketches, arrows, and ideas. He didn't see code. He saw kids. Kids like Diego. Kids like himself. Kids who were ready to learn, but just needed the gate to be opened. And he had the keys. The next update to algebra was the biggest yet. It introduced voice narration for students with dyslexia, motion-sensitive controls for motor-challenged learners, a new feature called Explain It Your Way, letting students record their own explanations for how they solved each puzzle. Beta testers cried. Teachers cried. Evan cried too, quietly, after everyone had logged off. Because now, the app wasn't just his story. It was theirs. 3 weeks later, Evan walked into a Harvard classroom, not as a guest, not as a novelty, but as a co-lecturer. A visiting professor handed him the mic. Evan looked out at a room full of future educators. He didn't start with math. He started with this. You don't need to teach students to be brilliant. Just remind them that they already are, and help them see it for themselves. In the back row, a girl in a patched hoodie gripped a library notebook. For the first time that semester, she raised her hand, and Evan Carter knew. This was only the beginning. The Global Education Innovators Summit in Boston. The lights were blinding, the stage towering. Evan Carter stood alone behind the podium, the youngest keynote speaker on the roster. Behind him, one word glowed on the giant screen. Access. He took a breath. When I was 17, Evan began, I taught myself algebra on a broken laptop and a $10 data plan. Not because I wanted to be special, but because I couldn't afford to fall behind. He looked up at the crowd. Now, Harvard teaches the app I built in a garage. A beat of silence. And today, I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to believe in all the kids like me, who are still learning behind closed doors. The room stood still. Then the applause came, standing, long, thunderous. After the summit, everything shifted. Investors began calling, but not the kind chasing profit. Mission-driven foundations, education ministries, from Singapore, Finland, Nigeria. They saw potential, not just for test scores, but for transformation. One proposal came from the Open Learning Coalition. We want to fund you to launch an international pilot across 14 underfunded countries. Why me? Evan asked during the pitch meeting. An executive smiled. Because you didn't just build a tool. You cracked something open, and the world noticed. But Evan did something most entrepreneurs wouldn't. He listened. He flew to Montana to sit with Lakota students who hated math because textbooks erased their way of seeing patterns. He rode a rickety Jeep in rural Cebu, meeting Filipino kids solving algebra problems by drawing them in the dirt. He visited a detention center in Michigan, where teens forgotten by nearly every system used algebra during the only quiet hour of their day. And in every place, one truth repeated. It's not that we can't learn, it's that no one thought we mattered enough to teach in our language. So Evan changed the roadmap. He expanded algebra's language support, partnered with cultural advisors, turned y, h, o, mx plus b into river slopes, exponential growth into bamboo stalks. He renamed the expansion, Algebra Roots. Then came the call that made Evan freeze. Harvard. Again. But this time, not an email. A phone call. Dean Margaret Sloan herself. We'd like to offer you a formal teaching position, she said. Visiting fellow in pedagogical innovation. Evan stood in his tiny office, sunlight hitting his desk. Looked down at his beat-up sneakers, heart thudding. I don't even have a college degree, he said. You have what most of our professors don't, Sloan replied. Proof that learning can happen anywhere. The announcement made headlines. From dropout to Harvard faculty, Evan Carter rewrites the rules. Math app born in a garage. Now powers classrooms globally. But none of it compared to one moment. A video message from Jordan Kim, Evan's childhood friend, now a high school teacher himself. Dude, Jordan said, face full of awe. I use algebra in my classroom every day. One of my students, Maya, solved a problem I didn't even get. She said it felt like playing chess, not doing math. Thought you should know. Evan rewound the video 3 times, sat very still. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about proving he could rise. It had become about raising others. One Friday evening, Evan walked into his old high school, not as a dropout, but as a guest speaker. The gym was full, folding chairs squeaked, a few teachers blinked, as if seeing a ghost. Evan stepped to the mic. I used to hide in the library during lunch, he began. I drew equations in the margins of comic books, because I didn't know anyone who cared about what I cared about. He held up one of those comic pages, still creased. But I wasn't wrong, I just wasn't seen. A girl in the front row wiped her eyes. A boy raised his hand. Do you think someone like me could ever build something like that? Evan smiled. Someone like you? You mean someone brilliant, curious, and underestimated? Yeah, I think you're exactly the kind of person who should. That night, as he walked to his car, an older man stood waiting outside. Mr. Harlan, his old math teacher. They hadn't spoken in years. You always made me nervous, Harlan said, correcting me mid-lecture, asking why, not just how. I was annoying, Evan offered, half joking. No, Harlan said. You were ahead. I just didn't know how to meet you where you were. They stood in silence for a while. Then Harlan reached into his coat, pulled out a photo. Evan, 15. Hoodie up. Eyes on the board. I kept this, Harlan said, to remind myself not to miss the next you. Evan swallowed hard, then nodded. Thank you, he said. Later that month, back at Harvard, a student knocked on Evan's office door. Emma Walsh, the quiet girl from the back row who had raised her hand during his first co-lecture. She held out a flash drive. What's this? Evan asked. My project, Emma said. It's a new module for algebra, about symmetry in nature. I wanted to build it, not just write a paper. He opened the files. Animations, code, diagrams layered with poetry. You didn't just build a lesson, Evan said softly. You built a bridge. Emma flushed. I used your app to understand math. I wanted to give something back. And just like that, the circle widened. That evening, Evan stood in front of his whiteboard. He wrote 4 words. What comes after this? Not for him, for them. For the hundreds of kids sending him sketches, for the teachers remixing his app, for the student in Uganda building an offline version on solar-powered tablets. He picked up his phone, typed a message to Dr. Grant. It's time to build the next layer, not just algebra, not just roots, but a platform where any student, anywhere, can create their own learning tools. We call it Labyrinth. Her reply came 2 minutes later. Let's make it happen. And somewhere, in a garage like the one Evan had started in, a kid pressed play on algebra for the first time. The graph spun. The function danced. And the future shifted. Not because someone unlocked a secret formula, but because someone remembered what learning really is. A path made clearer when someone lights the way. It was strange, Evan thought. How dreams didn't announce themselves with trumpets. They didn't knock. They didn't even wait for permission. They arrived quietly, sometimes disguised as broken laptops, or lonely nights in forgotten garages, sometimes as sleepless coding marathons with no applause, sometimes as an email from an 11-year-old refugee girl named Yara, and sometimes as a phone call from Harvard. Mr. Carter, the voice had said, the dean would like to meet with you in person. Now, Evan sat alone in a small conference room adjacent to his office. The walls were covered with whiteboards, wireframes, sticky notes, napkin scribbles. In the center of the table, a legal pad with 3 letters written in thick black ink. L-A-B Labyrinth Academic Builder. He whispered it aloud, like it was still just an idea trying to prove it deserved to be real. Labyrinth wasn't just an app, it was a rebellion, a space where kids who never saw themselves in textbooks could build their own, where the student became the designer, where algebra didn't just dance, it belonged. Evan thought of Maya in Queens, who built a lesson about parabolas using skateboarding arcs. He thought of Prince from Ghana, who coded a function visualizer during power outages using a hand-cranked charger and an old phone. He thought of himself in that garage with Wheezy, and he knew this wasn't an app anymore. It was a movement. But before Labyrinth could go live, Evan needed backing. Not just money, belief. He scheduled a meeting with Harvard's Internal Innovation Council, the same council that had once funded the initial expansion of algebra. But this idea was bigger, riskier, more radical. The night before the presentation, Evan barely slept. He paced his apartment, mumbling through his pitch, erasing slides, reworking diagrams. At 2:09 a.m., he paused in front of the mirror. "You're not here to impress them," he told himself. "You're here to invite them." The next day, the room was full of suits and skepticism. A senior fellow adjusted his glasses. "So this is essentially a gamified lesson editor?" "No," Evan replied. "It's a redefinition of authorship. You know how students can annotate essays? Labyrinth lets them annotate concepts, rebuild lessons, personalize math through culture, story, and play." Another committee member raised an eyebrow. "What if they get it wrong?" Evan leaned forward. "What if the way we've been teaching is already wrong for them?" Silence. Then, from the back of the room, someone spoke up. It was Dr. Evelyn Monroe, the youngest on the panel, and the only one who had taught middle school in a Title I district. "I've seen what algebra did," she said. "Kids who used to fake sick on test days now stay after school to build equations. I say we give Labyrinth a chance." That vote tipped the scale. The green light came through 2 days later. Evan sat in his office rereading the approval letter. A small line at the bottom made him smile. "We believe in what you're building. Let us know how we can help." The next 6 months were a blur. He pulled together a team of coders, educators, artists, even a few former students who had used algebra in high school and now wanted to help others. One of them was Emma, now a sophomore at Harvard. She became the head of UX design. "Every button should feel like an open door," she said. They worked from Evan's apartment, from borrowed rooms at the education lab, from a converted basement in a community center. Wi-Fi was spotty. The chairs were mismatched. Half the time, the whiteboard markers were dry. But no one complained. They were building something that mattered. In week 11 of development, they hit their first wall. The codebase was unstable. Some student-created modules crashed. Some wouldn't save. A senior coder named Jose looked at Evan, face tired. "We could cut creator mode," Jose said. "Just make this a fancy flashcard app." "No," Evan said firmly. "If they can't build with it, it's just another tool for them, not with them." He spent the next 3 nights debugging by hand. Sleep-deprived, fingers sore, eyes bloodshot. He remembered his mom saying once, "The first version of anything beautiful is usually broken." He fixed 234 bugs that weekend. One quiet Tuesday morning, Labyrinth went into closed beta. They invited 300 students from 12 countries. The feedback flooded in. A girl in Brazil made a module explaining systems of equations using her grandma's cooking recipes. A boy in Detroit built a lesson on slopes using street maps and bus routes. A 14-year-old in rural India created a color-coded visualizer for quadratic functions and included a Hindi voiceover for accessibility. Evan watched every submission. His inbox buzzed constantly. But it was one message that made him pause. "Dear Mr. Carter, my name is Yara. I am 11. I live in a refugee camp in Jordan. My teacher showed us your app. I built a lesson about pyramids and number patterns. My little brother watched it. Now he wants to learn math, too. He used to be scared. Not anymore. Thank you." Evan didn't cry, but he closed his laptop and walked outside, sat on the library steps, and just breathed. 3 months later, the public launch came. Harvard hosted a live event in Sanders Theater. Evan wore a second-hand blazer and beat-up Converse. No stage lights could outshine the nerves in his chest. He stood before a crowd of students, professors, parents, and donors. Emma introduced him. He started with a cracked laptop. Now he's cracked open how we teach. The screen behind him lit up with a single phrase. What if every student became the teacher they needed? Evan told the story, not of apps, but of access, of how kids don't need more information. They need invitation, of how a janitor in New York once taught herself calculus using sidewalk chalk, and now uses Labyrinth to build lessons for her GED class. He ended with this: Labyrinth isn't about getting kids to memorize, it's about helping them matter. The audience didn't clap right away. They stood, then they clapped, then they cried. That night, back at home, Evan received a call. It was his mom. "I saw the live stream," she said. "You look like your father." He closed his eyes. He hadn't heard that in years. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Thanks, Mom." A pause. "I saw the shoes. Still the same." He laughed. "You raised a minimalist." She laughed too, the kind of laugh that heals. At 2 a.m., Evan stood again in the place where it had all begun. His garage. The treadmill was still there. The roof still leaked. But on the wall, there was now a whiteboard. Someone had written in thick black marker, "Learning happens anywhere, even here," and beneath it, in a child's handwriting, "Especially here." Evan smiled, picked up a piece of chalk, out of instinct, then wrote, "Build, share, multiply," and walked into the night, heart full, mind racing. Labyrinth had begun. It was 4:16 a.m. Long after most of Cambridge had gone quiet, Evan Carter sat alone in a small conference room beside his office. On the table in front of him was an empty coffee cup, a legal pad with diagrams, and a draft letter titled Labyrinth, Proposal for Formal Adoption. Tomorrow he would present it to Harvard's Internal Innovation Council, the same council that had greenlit the first steps of his journey. But this time, it wasn't just about a small pilot. This time, he was asking for more. For Labyrinth to become part of the university's core curriculum. He exhaled. "This isn't about me anymore," he whispered. "It's about them." The next day, room 213 was full. More council members than Evan had ever seen. Deans, senior faculty, learning scientists, and in the corner, Dr. Evelyn Monroe. Her expression calm, curious. Evan stood at the front, blazer pressed, hands steady. "Last time I was here," he began softly, "I asked you to believe a high school dropout could contribute to math education." He paused. "You gave me that chance." A murmur of acknowledgement. Evan clicked the screen, a looping video of students around the world using Labyrinth. Rural classrooms in Kenya, a library in Helsinki, a refugee camp in Jordan, Yara and her brother laughing as they traced patterns on a tablet. "Today, I'm here to ask something bigger," Evan continued. "Not to showcase an app, but to invite you to help change the way we think about how math is taught and how it is felt." He moved to the next slide, a quote from one of his recent beta testers. "I thought I wasn't a math person, but maybe math just wasn't speaking my language yet." The room fell still. Dr. Patel, who had once been the council's most skeptical voice, leaned forward. "You're proposing Labyrinth be integrated into foundations of algebra across the university?" "Yes," Evan replied. "But not as a side project, as a core tool, one that empowers students to build their own learning pathways, to make the subject their own." A pause. A professor from the back row spoke up. "But what if students build modules that are incorrect?" Evan nodded. "That will happen. But in correcting their own understanding, they will engage deeper than rote memorization ever allows." Another voice chimed in. "This blurs the line between learning and teaching." Exactly, Evan replied. When a student teaches something, they own it. Labyrinth gives them that ownership. He showed metrics, retention gains, engagement hours, testimonials from educators in 10 countries. But it was the next slide that drew gasps. A hand-drawn note, projected large. Dear Mr. Carter, when I built my lesson, my brother smiled for the first time in weeks. He told me I was smart. I didn't know I was smart. Now I want to be a teacher one day. Thank you, Yara. Evan let the silence linger. Math is not just numbers. It is identity. It is agency. It is hope. He turned to the room. I'm not here to ask you to protect a legacy. I'm here to ask you to build a bridge for those who've never been invited to cross it. The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. Dr. Monroe stood and addressed the room. Labyrinth is more than a tool. It is an opportunity, and it is time. The motion passed. Labyrinth would be integrated, officially, formally, globally. That night, Evan sat on the steps outside Widener Library, the same steps where he had once written, "Make the thing you wish existed when you were 12. Now, that thing was in classrooms from Boston to Beirut, from Nairobi to New York, and it was just the beginning. His phone buzzed. An email. Subject: Visit request. Labyrinth in action. From a middle school principal in Detroit. We're seeing something we haven't seen before. Students who had given up, staying after school to build math lessons. Would you come visit? Evan smiled, typed back. Yes, absolutely. But when he put the phone down, there was another message waiting. From Yara. A short video. Her brother, giggling as he tapped through her latest module. At the end, Yara spoke softly into the camera. I used to think I wasn't a math person. Now I know I can teach my brother. And maybe one day, more kids too. Evan watched the video 3 times, then simply wrote back, Yara, you already are a teacher, and the world is lucky to have you. As the night deepened, Evan returned to the incubator lab. The whiteboards were full, the screens glowing. A single line he had written weeks ago now circled in red. What comes after this? He picked up a marker, wrote beneath it. A world where no child says, I'm not a math person. And beneath that, one more line. A world where every child says, I can build this. Because in the end, Evan knew. It was never about apps, or code, or recognition. It was about one thing, belief. The math we forgot was never about numbers. It was about reminding each other, every student, every teacher, every learner, that they already belong. And Labyrinth was only the beginning. 1 year had passed. Labyrinth wasn't a project anymore. It was a movement. Across campuses and classrooms, the old way of teaching had begun to bend. Not break, but breathe. Instead of forcing students to get the right answer, educators began asking, what's the story behind your thinking? Math wasn't just numbers anymore. It was motion, color, narrative. And Evan Carter? He didn't become a celebrity. He didn't move to Silicon Valley, didn't build an empire of gold-trimmed apps. He stayed in Cambridge, still wore scuffed sneakers, still took late-night calls from teachers in underfunded districts trying to troubleshoot lesson uploads, still answered emails from students who ended with, I never thought I was smart, until I saw myself in this. A year passed, then 2. Evan built new features, expanded multilingual support. He even added an offline learning module for students without steady Wi-Fi. because he hadn't forgotten what it felt like to reload a single Khan Academy page on a $10 data plan. Then one afternoon, while walking across the quad, Evan spotted a chalkboard sign outside the Student Union building. Tonight, midnight session, learning from the edges, hosted by Jensen Fellows. He smiled. He hadn't named the fellowship after himself. Someone else had. He'd tried to stop them. He failed. The Jensen Fellows were students chosen not for grades, but for grit, for curiosity, for showing up when no one clapped. They ran informal lessons late at night, just like Evan had once done solo in that empty garage. But now, no one was alone. It was in one of those sessions that he met Maya, a 17-year-old coder from South Dakota. She had built a lesson inside Labyrinth that connected sine waves to the rhythms in Lakota music. It was genius, and raw, and hers. After class, she approached Evan. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say, your story made me believe I could do this." Evan looked at her, saw something he'd seen in the mirror years ago, uncertainty holding hands with potential. He smiled. "You don't need to be me, Maya," he said. "You just need to be heard." That night he returned to the garage, not to code, not to work, just to sit. The same treadmill sat untouched, the roof still creaked, but now the space held something sacred. It wasn't just the birthplace of an app. It was the graveyard of self-doubt, the altar of persistence, the workshop where no one became someone. He looked around and whispered, "You did good, Wheezy." The old Toshiba laptop still sat on the shelf, battery long dead, screen cracked, but he kept it, like an old friend who'd seen everything. Weeks later, the call came from the White House. They wanted to honor him as part of a National Innovators Forum. The award was fancy. The press would be there. His name would trend. Evan respectfully declined. He wasn't against awards. He was just busy, helping Maya prepare her first public lesson, because that's what builders do. They don't wait for applause. They build ladders behind them. One winter morning, as snow kissed the rooftops of Cambridge, Evan received a handwritten envelope. No return address. Inside, a note. "Dear Mr. Carter, I used to hate math, but then I saw my story inside it. Now I want to teach too. Your friend, Leo, age 12. Below that, a drawing. Stick figures, one holding a mop, one holding chalk, and between them, a spark." Evan stared at it. Tears slipped quietly down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them. Some messages don't need responses. They just need to be carried. On the 5th anniversary of Labyrinth, Harvard hosted a campus-wide event. Evan was asked to give a keynote. He didn't use a script. He stepped onto the stage, looked at the sea of students, educators, skeptics, dreamers, and said, "I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't graduate high school. I didn't know anyone who looked like me, lived like me, or struggled like me, who made it this far. But I had questions. I had late nights, and I had a garage. That was enough." He paused, then added, "If you're waiting for permission to matter, stop. You matter already. Now go build something beautiful with it." The room stood. Not for a coder, not for an app, but for a truth too long forgotten. That education doesn't start with access. It starts with belief. Later that night, Evan walked past the same classroom where he once sat in the back. Anonymous, uncredentialed, underestimated. The lights were off. The board was clean. He stepped inside, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote, "He wasn't a genius. He just didn't quit." Then beneath it, "Now, it's your turn." And somewhere in a garage, a classroom, or a refugee camp, a kid would soon pick up a tablet, tap on a lesson, smile, and remember, they belong too. Because once upon a time, a boy named Evan Carter built a door and then left it open. The end.